fact that the mother who's managing the home and raising children, the fact that she's literally not only getting no credit in society for that, but she's actually in many, many cases being condescended to. Isn't that just the most backwards thing?
It is.
In a country that calls itself progressive, that's the most regressive, backwards thing I've ever heard of. If it's so easy, let's see you do it.
And I shall anoint your eyes, that you may see. Those whom I love, I reprove and discipline. Repent.
I think economics has played a part into the demise of the traditional family.
100%.
When me and Samantha were two working parents, it was super easy to deal with life. But when we moved into the traditional roles, I mean, it's hard. Like, you know, it's hard. Like, it's
financially hard.
Financially,
you don't get to farm as much stuff out.
Exactly. You don't get to farm out. And like, I come home from work and Samantha's like, oh my gosh, like you look exhausted. And I'm like, Samantha, like, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm tired, but you do way
You're
more
the one in the trenches
than I do. Like,
yeah, why don't you go get a couple minutes to yourself?
Yeah, that's what I try.
I do that all the time with my wife.
She is equipped to do it because I spend Saturday mornings with them. And I'm like, I don't know how you're doing this.
I know. I completely agree with that.
And she comes out
so uniquely exhausting in some ways. It's wonderful having your children, but it is uniquely exhausting. The taking and the needing.
She'll even come out and she's like, hey, you're getting me off routine. Okay? Like days that I have off, like this is the routine for today. You're bumping the boat a little bit. Let me handle this. Let me get us back on course correction. And you just fall into our routine because this is my realm. The house is my realm.
That's great.
So
that's so great. And she has to deal with the consequences if they break routine.
Right.
You know, so it's very fair that she's like, hey, you know, we got.
Yeah.
And children need that. And they like that. And they want that. Even though they claim they don't. They really do.
I equate the feeling that when Samantha tries to tell me, like, hey, you've bumped us off routine. Like, what are you doing? It's just set back a company by 45 days. Like,
right. That whole thing is so relatable to me, man, because my wife also really has a handle on the mechanics of the home. And when I come home, I can tell that most jobs don't require the trifecta. That some do, but most require one of these components of life. So the mother is really, really giving of herself.
And it's funny because like Samantha gets frustrated. She's like, I just don't get it. Like, you come home and you tell the exact same thing one time that I've told them 4 times and they listen right away. Threaten them that I'm going to let dad know, and then they stop what they're doing. She's like, why won't they just listen for me? But I think it goes back to the whole fears of the unknown. Like, I already know mom's routine. I know mom's mannerisms. I know how she acts. But you bring in...
Dad's an X factor.
Yeah, you bring in dad, and I don't know.
I remember my father, he had a presence about him. It definitely felt different. Like the whole room changed.
Yeah.
When he walked into it. I'm in this great spot, and I know you are too. I'm in this spot where like it's very unfair to Kelly because she's in the trenches and she's also homeschooling our children. And then I come home and there's just this like outburst of love and excitement.
It's like a party every time.
Yeah, it's like, And we me and you both know that this is a season, but my wife, I do believe, likes to see that. But it has to, on some level, be deeply unfair to witness it because, it's just like you always take for granted the thing that's constantly there. But then again, I always tell my wife, I'm like, the reason that men just adore their mothers and love their mothers, why during the Super Bowl are all these athletes?
Yeah.
Is because when you grow up, you start to realize my mother was just the cement. The reason I'm not in prison.
That's funny because one of the things that Samantha's talked about is when she left the workforce, she said that I needed to because it rebirthed the relationship with Mason. Like Mason knew daycare. I'm not trying to say daycare is wrong per se, but what she says is that it gave me an opportunity to recapture the mother-son relationship, and we had to unpack it. There was a lot to unpack. We had to peel back onions, put onion layers back up,
peel
them back down.
And it makes sense. I mean, time in any relationship, right, is the greatest of commodities.
Yeah.
So if you had less of it in the day, that would change the balance. That's the other thing, Seth, is we've organized our society where, you and I are talking like radicals here.
Yeah.
And I know people see it like that. But it is interesting. We've organized our society in this way. So even if parents want to choose differently, many can't. Many have established their entire financial situation upon this, like, 2-income model. Back in the day, so this would have been like Leave It to Beaver days, the money that a company had to pay, the salary that a company had to pay a breadwinner for a family, had to sustain that family, right?
Yeah.
So many homes were organizing themselves like the father would be the breadwinner, the mother would raise the family. That money you had to make a life work. You had to be able to pay a mortgage and own a car.
Yeah.
Obviously, the 60s radically transforms our culture, 70s, 80s, 90s, women penetrate the workforce in huge numbers. And now what's interesting about that is now to do that same level of like middle class, whatever Leave It to Beaver was, you actually need 2 incomes. What has been fascinating about that is like now you're almost structuring society to not allow that as an option. Or you're making it very difficult. Me and Kelly just have to financially they're not really difficult things, but they're different than our peers.
Yeah.
That's how I would say it. They're different priorities than our peers.
One of the first things I did was like, Samantha, like on daycare alone, we're spending $24,000 a year just to have our kids in daycare. I was like, I'm paying
$24,000
for both of them. Yeah. I'm like, I'm paying this much money to see my kids for 4 hours a day, and I don't even get to say that I raised them.
I don't know much about this stuff, so it's all like complete mystery to me, but $24,000.
Yeah.
How are people swinging that?
If you start looking at everything else we have to do because we're both working, like, okay, so then we don't buy as many groceries because it's more advantageous to eat out. So then there's another expense. We're driving 2 different cars, 2 different ways that we're going,
Yes.
like back and forth.
I've never thought about this.
And it came down to everyone's like, even with 2 incomes, like you're still almost working to just pay for you guys to both work.
When you factor in the gas,
everything.
the car maintenance. Wow.
And this is where I say society, the 2 incomes, it isn't because we have to have 2 incomes. It's that society has ingrained in our heads that women, you're missing out if you don't get in the workforce. And oh, by the way, you're going to miss out on material. And
it's possible you're missing out on a little material. That's possible. I'm just going to be honest.
I would love to go out and do all kinds of stuff. And I know financially I can't. And that's part of learning together. For a short spike of fun, like, could I have gone it the same way if I did something else and maybe it would have been a little bit cheaper? And it's funny, like some of the best times that we have, like my family loves pizza and we still love pizza and we still order pizza a lot. But my kids I've never seen them so joyful and intrigued as when Samantha said, hey, we're not ordering pizza tonight. We're just making our own French bread pizza, and just got the bread and made it. And they loved it. And they're like, this is the best thing ever.
Cool story, dude.
We had fun ordering pizza.
Such an interesting anecdote. There's an analogy in that pizza thing for this whole thing.
Yeah.
I saw this little clip where somebody was like, your kids are little that's it. Every time I talk to successful people, non-successful people, whatever you want to define them as, they all say that. They all say it was so fast. You got a 10-year-old, right?
Yeah. Well, it'll be 9. Yeah. He's 9. Yeah.
Double that, he's out.
I know.
That's how quick it goes. Like Grant's 7, double that, he's 14. We're looking at driver's license. I blink my eyes again. He's graduated. There's really something to this. There's really something to the fact that, is it really weakness to prioritize this? No matter what you have to lay down on the cost, if it even is that might not even be the right way to put that. This might not work for everybody, but I think it's one of these things you look again at.
I think
you look at it again.
Pros and cons to it, but the school taxes and then using it becomes a stipend or a payment to the homeschool family. Traditionally, is the mother who's doing the homeschooling. So then to play by the rules of the world, okay, well, now they are doing a job. And they're getting paid. So then you can have that resume, but now on the resume, they're capturing these hard and soft skills that they've been doing as they were paid.
Man, when's that going to happen?
Well, that's something I'm a huge advocate on, but I understand the concern from like the homeschool community. It's like, okay, well, if we hold on to it as a stipend that's paid to us, what kind of restrictions can the state say? Like, well, then fine, we'll give you back your money, but you will pay
you're
Caesar.
A part of the machine now.
You also have to make sure that you teach this and that you have to do that.
The fact that the mother who's managing the home and raising children, the fact that she's literally not only getting no credit in society for that, but she's actually in many, many cases being condescended to. Isn't that just the most backwards thing?
It is.
In a country that calls itself progressive. That's the most regressive, backwards thing I've ever heard of. If it's so easy, let's see you do it.
Yeah.
This condescension that sometimes happens to mothers that are raising their children at home. That stuff drives me nuts. You don't have to do it yourself, but to condescend to it, that's a tough, jagged pill for me to swallow when I'm around that.
Nothing taken away from teachers. Like, there are teachers out there that are great teachers, but to be a homeschool mom, there's been times that Samantha's been sick and I'm like, hey, I'll step in. No problem.
And it is no joke.
Oh man. She's like, you've been here for 15 minutes and you've given Mason 4 different writing lessons because you're getting angry because he's not listening to what you say to do. I was like, well, yeah, what do you want me to do? Like, he's not listening. She's like, yeah, do it like this. But then on the flip side, she comes to me with problems that Mason's having at school. And because I'm from that 10,000 foot view,
yes,
I can be like, hey,
yes,
I'm seeing this. I'm witnessing it. Why don't you do it like this?
Yes.
And she's like, oh my gosh.
You really do work as a team. Yeah, I do the same thing with my wife.
It's definitely harder. The traditional family as it is now, it's harder than it was when it was
harder.
because it requires us to trust each other, trust God, and work off of strengths and weaknesses, and then a whole lot of prayer to make sure it's going to work.
I love that, Seth, because that's exactly what it does, and it brings you closer as a family. It really does bring you closer. The closeness to it that I really wish people could experience. Like the way we raise children in America is we phone a lot of things in and we farm a lot of things out. And a lot of the just heavy lifting and the annoying. We do what we do in America. We just pay somebody else to do it or we farm it out. And sometimes, look, I'm just as guilty as of seizing the conveniences of the West as the next person. But when you reacclimate and your muscles get stronger in doing that, you do realize there's huge reward to it. I'm impressed by homeschool kids. I just am. There are exceptions, but they have a freedom of education and a freedom of mind and a freedom of creativity and the way they see themselves. And I want that for my children.
Case in point, Mason was interested in roller coasters. So then he started learning about roller coasters. Then he built his own roller coaster. And then from that design is like, why does everyone stay in when it goes upside down? Like
physics.
Right. And the brain just goes, they're going to connect with what they want to connect to, and they're going to learn. First generation homeschooling mothers, not even trying to, but they look for homeschooling as the mechanism, but they're looking for results. Public school or what is being society is like saying is a big deal.
You got to rethink the whole model.
Right.
You really do.
I tell Samantha all the time, like her and her friends, I'm like, you guys are not giving you guys enough credit. You are way above par.
Yeah, I agree. And I see it, by the way. I see it because, we're a part of these groups and stuff, and I can see it.
But they let themselves just get beat up of critical of themselves.
That's easy too because we're all public school educated, so we only have one measuring stick. We only understand one way, so we really feel like we're flying the plane without a. You know what I mean? We're just like, I hope we're doing this right.
Even within the same group, I'm like, I tell Samantha too, you can't compare yourself or where our kids are to any of your friends because different teaching styles, different behaviors, different interests, different kids is and that's the beauty of homeschool.
That's the beauty.
Being able to meet a child at their unique way of learning.
And let me tell you, Seth, I think the proof is going to be in the pudding.
Oh, it's coming.
I just totally believe that. I mean, look, I could eat crow on that, but I don't think I will. If I was a bet man, I'd push all in. Lastly, all I would say is as two Christian men who have waxed poetic about masculinity and females and all these different things. This is my pitch. And this is my pitch specifically to children of light, Christians. If you have a bunch of men who are serious with the fear of God, who are serious about honoring their wives and raising their sons and their daughters and being members of their communities, they're present, they're capable, they're confident. How does this not make your community 50% better overnight? Imagine your community crawling with this kind of a man, and you really put yourself on a lie detector test, and you look me in the eyes, and you tell me that you don't think that's going to improve things in every way possible, from mentorship to how safe your communities are. I can't think of a matrix that the presence of good, solid, strong men do not improve. I can't even think of one.
The functional men that we see in society need to raise to being that servant leader, command the audience that you have in front of you, and stop holding back and influence others.
You're not going to get permission from a broken world to do that. Assert yourself into a world that desperately needs strong men. And it doesn't really matter what the magazines are saying or the television shows are saying or your social media saying. They're just wrong. Seth, your joy.
Hey, man. Always.
Good, man. Thanks for being here.
Folks, poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
The first sort of mainstream African American who was articulate and bright and clean and nice looking guy.
If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
It don't have nothing to do with Trump.
Only African American woman that ever been elected to the United States Senate. A whole range of people. My point is,
that's not true. The other one is here.
Well, I'm so glad to hear you talking about that as eloquently as you do, Joe.